playing video games or using your phone to browse social media is probably not an issue for you. Indeed, I'm sure you could engage in each of those tasks while seated in front of a screen for up to 2 hours without losing focus. However, how about studying for 30 minutes? Oh no! That might be too difficult. Would you mind investing an additional hour in your side project? Well, sounds a little unappealing. You know rationally that studying, working out, starting a company, or doing anything else equally productive will benefit you more in the long term, yet you still choose to watch TV, play video games, and browse social media. It may be argued that the reason is evident. While the other task is challenging and demands work, the first task is simple and doesn't take much time. However, other people appear to have no trouble routinely studying, working out, or working on side projects. Which raises the question, why do some people have greater motivation to take on challenging tasks? Is it possible to simplify challenging tasks? Dopamine is a brain chemical that we must examine in order to provide an answer. Many people think of dopamine as a pleasure chemical. That's not exactly what it does, though. It's dopamine that drives our cravings. And we are motivated to get up and accomplish things by that desire. I'll show you some rat trials that neuroscientists conducted to demonstrate the potency of dopamine if you have any doubts. The rats' brains were implanted with electrodes by the researchers. The researchers activated the rat's cerebral reward system each time it pushed a lever. As a result, the rats had intense cravings that prevented them from stopping to pull on the lever for hours at a time. The rats would not even go to sleep or eat. They would simply keep pulling on the lever until they passed out from fatigue. However, things were then turned around. The reward center of the brain's dopamine release was inhibited by the researchers. Rats thus developed such a sedentary lifestyle that it was not worth it for them to get up to water. They refused to eat. They had no desire to mate. They had no cravings at all. One may argue that the rats had given up on life altogether. The rats would still eat and appreciate the food, though, provided it was placed right in front of them. Simply put, they lacked the willpower to get up and handle it themselves. One would assume that our need for food and drink is driven by hunger or thirst. However, if you engage in a high dopamine activity, you'll be driven to keep doing it. Which actions then release dopamine? Dopamine has comparable impacts on people and our daily existence. Actually, your brain bases a lot of its priority setting on the amount of dopamine it anticipates receiving. You will not be as motivated to engage in an activity if it releases an excessive amount of dopamine. For example, your brain produces dopamine before eating comfort food because it expects the meal to make you feel good, even if it exacerbates your symptoms. This is due to the fact that your brain is indifferent to whether or not your elevated dopamine activity is harmful. It only desires more of it. An archetypal illustration would be a drug abuser. He is aware of the negative effects of his actions on himself. But more of that narcotic is all he wants. Cocaine and heroin release excessive quantities of dopamine in addition to making you euphoric, which increases your desire for them. It should go without saying that almost anything causes some dopamine to be released. It even occurs when you drink water while you're thirsty. On the other hand, receiving a reward at random causes the most dopamine release. Playing slots at a casino is one instance of this. You ultimately hope to receive a larger payout, even if up until then you've only been losing money. Furthermore, even if we are unaware of it, we regularly expose our brains to abnormally high levels of dopamine in today's digital world. High dopamine activities include, but are not limited to, browsing social media, playing video games, and viewing porn online. With each of those actions, we expect a reward of some kind. We check our phones constantly because of this. We anticipate receiving a communication, either SMS or otherwise. And we are aware that we will ultimately get it. We are like those rats who are trying to receive a fresh dopamine rush by pressing the lever. You may be thinking, oh, so what? It's not like I'm getting hurt by it. However, you would be mistaken. Homeostasis is the name of a biological mechanism in our bodies. You are going to deprive yourself of all outside pleasure for the duration of the day. You will learn to love being bored. And there will be a ton of boredom, trust me. Nonetheless, you are permitted to do the following: take a stroll. Spend some time alone yourself, meditating. Think back on your objectives in life. Write down whatever thoughts come to you. Using actual paper, not an app on your phone or computer. It may seem like a lot going on. Nevertheless, you must be capable of taking drastic action if you want dramatic outcomes and you want them quickly. Currently, you may be wondering why this would even be effective. This is one way you may look at it. Assume for the moment that you have been dining at the greatest restaurant in your community for every meal. Consequently, those elaborate dinners turned into your new normal. You would most likely decline an offer of a bowl of plain rice if one were made. It just wouldn't have the same flavor as your typical restaurant dish. However, a bowl of plain rice may not seem so horrible if you were abruptly abandoned on a desolate island and famished. And the dopamine detox accomplishes just that. It deprives you of all the pleasure you typically experience, which increases your desire for those less fulfilling pursuits. In other words, dopamine detoxification works because it makes you so bored that dull things start to seem pleasurable. You may undertake a milder dopamine detox if you don't want to go to such great measures and deprive yourself of any pleasure. You are going to choose one day each week to entirely abstain from one of your high dopamine behaviors, whatever such conduct may be. Perhaps you constantly check your phone, play video games on your computer, watch TV shows in excess, consume unhealthy food, or browse porn online. And you will not engage in that activity coming forward for a whole day. Sure, you'll become a little bored, but that's the idea. After excessively high levels of dopamine have been flooding your brain, you want to give your dopamine receptors time to heal. Additionally, boredom will motivate you to take on other tasks throughout the day. Things you would often put off as they don't trigger as much dopamine to be released. It's also simpler for you to complete them since you're bored. Of course, it's a good idea to occasionally abstain from high dopamine behavior. However, it's best to steer clear of those actions completely, or at the very least, minimize them. Rather, you should associate dopamine with more of the things that will genuinely help you. And I discovered that engaging in high dopamine activities now might work as a motivator to pursue endeavors that would ultimately benefit you in the long run. Put another way, you may utilize your elevated dopamine levels as a prize for doing challenging tasks. And I myself carry out precisely this. Every challenging, low dopamine task I perform is tracked. I'm cleaning my flat, playing the piano, reading, working out, making these movies, and so on. At the end of the day, I treat myself to a high dopamine activity once I reach a particular productivity goal. Here, after and at the end of the day are crucial terms. I won't feel like performing the low dopamine work if I engage in high dopamine behavior beforehand. I just won't have enough motivation. I thus always begin with the challenging tasks and only later do I give in to high dopamine pursuits. As an illustration, I treat myself to a half hour of high dopamine behavior at the end of the day for each hour of low dopamine work performed. I give myself around 2 hours of high dopamine behavior for every 8 hours of low dopamine. These are, of course, my ratios. You may adjust them to suit your needs. It should be mentioned that you should not reward yourself for engaging in a health-harming habit if you are addicted to it. Find a new, less harmful reward instead. One that, in your opinion, is still worthwhile. In case you're curious, my guilty pleasure is surfing the internet. I could easily spend hours lost there if I didn't do anything else. I have this system because of it. It's to help me manage my addiction. Don't get me wrong, even with this technique, I still schedule days when I absolutely avoid high dopamine activities. In closing, I would want to suggest that it is feasible to find a way to make challenging tasks seem easy. However, concentrating on something that doesn't generate a lot of dopamine will not thrill you as much when your brain is constantly receiving so much of it. Because of this, you may want to cut back on your use of your computer and phone as well as other high dopamine activities. Furthermore, I can attest that it is well worth the effort. Thus, as soon as feasible, begin dopamine detoxification for your brain if you struggle with motivation.